Hi everyone, my name is Sile Sibanda. I am born in Zimbabwe and I came to the UK when I was 12 years old with my sister to live here with my mum. And ever since I've come to the UK, I've been involved in loads of community projects, from running a glee club at the age of 12 to representing young people at the House of Lords with Children's University. And then I discovered poetry and started loving writing and performing it, and I became a spoken word artist, as well as a stage and radio presenter. Because I just love getting involved in loads of different events, making people feel comfortable, speaking to young people, older people, and in radio, I just love interviewing and getting to know people and what makes them work. I would like to say thank you so much to Rotherham Council for putting this project together, the Women of the World, and thank you to you for watching it. My name is Sile Sibanda. I am a spoken word artist as well as a stage and radio presenter. I've just recently got into journalism. I say I got into it by chance through a competition by the BBC. And so it was to work for a radio station for a year. And I entered it thinking, why not? Let me give it a go. And ended up with a job. And, my year of training is up, and I now get to present an evening show, as well as finding out different stories and things. And so when I saw the women on the list, I was like, Chrystal, I need to talk to Chrystal because she's...
Oh, really? I feel surprised. Thank you. Oh my God, that's amazing. But anyway, I won't interrupt. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But that's me. What about you? Tell me about you.
So I'm Chrystal Genesis. I am an award-winning podcaster, journalist, and also arts and cultural programmer. So I studied journalism for undergrad and postgrad, like a long time ago, and then started off doing work experience at the BBC, and then worked at local, national, and international, as well as music, arts and current affairs and things like that. And so I'm a journalist, but then I also have recently just left working at South Bank Centre, where I ran the young people's programme for 15 to 30. So that's where I did lots of arts and cultural programming. But I also did a lot of arts and cultural programming through my podcast Stance, which I think you referenced, which is the arts, culture and kind of politicsy current affairs monthly podcast that comes out. It's global, essentially. Oh. And so, that's kind of my background. I'm from London, South London, a place called Brixton. And I'm actually in New York now because I moved here literally a week ago today, to take up a job working for this great company called Neon Hum, who are owned by Sony, making audio.
That is so cool. I want to know all about what it's like in America. But first, I have to start with you being a journalist. What inspired you to get into journalism?
Do you know what? I have no idea. I was always one of those people where I was younger and, your friends were like, oh, I want to do this. I want to be a singer. I want to be a doctor. I want to do this. I didn't know. All I knew is that I liked people. I liked socializing and I liked asking questions. And I was interested in how things worked. I was interested in government, people, inside, outside ideas. And I was just a curious young person, but I loved socializing basically and hanging out, right? I'm not going to lie. But bizarrely, thinking back, I always used to read the newspapers and stuff as a kid. So I was obviously quite interested, and I knew all of the TV presenters' names, the news presenters' names. So there's obviously something going on when I was interested. I remember Mary Nightingale and obviously Trevor McDonald. I just knew all their names. I'd be sitting watching the news. So I was always interested in what is outside of my bubble. And obviously Brixton is really multicultural anyway. So you're going to be thinking about what's outside of London or, that part of South London in the UK. But I was always interested in what more was there. So I think I kind of fell into it, to be honest. And then someone said to me, my brother, when I was at college, have you thought about journalism? Because I was like, I want to go to university, but I don't know what to do. And he was like, journalism. And then I kind of looked into it and I was like, oh, it sounds really good. Yeah.
That's cool. And when you started working in journalism, was there any particular medium that you liked? Were you more into radio, TV, or print, or did you like all of it?
Yeah. Well, obviously digital wasn't massive. Although when I was working for the student newspapery stuff, I was the digital, well, I didn't call it digital, but we called it the online editor. So that was 2008 or something. I'm so bad with my dates. So that wasn't so much of a thing. But what I did know is that I didn't want to work for newspapers because they could be politically, have a strong political stance. And I like the idea of broadcasts, which kind of had regulation, although, it's complicated, right? It can still have a stance. Obviously, in America, where I am now, but in the UK, they say they can't, but actually, it depends on the team, you know what I mean, and what content you're going to get. So it's complicated. But at the time, I was like, this feels more like democratic. So that's why I wanted to get into it, into broadcast. So that's when I did a postgrad in broadcast journalism, because I did a straight BA in journalism before that. And so I think broadcast definitely appealed to me because of that. But then I also grew up listening to radio and music the whole time, from like pirate radio, local radio, national. So radio was always something that I liked, was natural. And I feel like I just love how you can just make it on your own or with like a small team. And TV, I felt like you had to rely on so many people. I think the idea about a picture says 1,000 words is kind of true in many ways, but I think radio is so intimate, and there's just so much more that you can do with it that I love. And that's why this boom in podcasting is amazing. So I like TV. I've done a bit of TV, but I find that audio is just something that I love as well.
So take me to your first day working at the BBC. You know, you thought about doing it, working at BBC or any other program. What was that like for you?
So the first day I did work experience, and I remember they were just so nice. It was at BBC London, and it was probably like one of the best teams I've ever worked with, actually. People were so open. They come from completely different worlds, not like similar worlds, you know, but like right and left. It wasn't like that at all, which you find in lots of spaces. It was more like just completely different worlds, very different views. So I felt like you could inform the listener in a really interesting way. So that's kind of what I did. And I was doing, you know, I think I was, if I remember correctly, I was working on like the Vanessa Feltz show and the Eddie Nestor show. And I was just like printing scripts, you know, doing the phones when people would call in, and then writing them down, suggesting good ones. And then also like helping them shape the program, like calling up guests, like, you know, contributors, and saying, do you want to come on, and all this kind of stuff, you know, starting really early in the morning you start. And so that was kind of the first day, but I thought it was really exciting. I was just so happy to just be in that space, and then just be there with a bunch of people who really understood London like I did, and were really interested in like informing and educating the audience, and entertaining the audience as well.
And then you have worked, you know, as a producer, but you've also worked as a presenter. What do you think is good about doing both?
Well, I feel like being producing, technically, I just think, well, producing, you have more power, essentially, I think, in the sense that you shape things, yeah? So you go and you take an idea and you develop it and you run with it. So you can shape it however you want. And there's so many ways to shape a story. So I think technically you have more power. And in terms of the career trajectory, you can be editor, and then you can get into the business side. So a lot more interesting things like that. But you do a lot of the legwork and you get paid less, right? So that's the kind of downside of it. And I think presenter is a massive skill, to be honest. I think the good thing, well, actually, I don't know if I'd say good, actually, because it's not necessarily a good thing, but the thing about podcasting, it's all pre-recorded. Yeah. So you don't have to do live stuff, but there is a sadness in that, because we should be able to learn to do live. So I think that nowadays it's a bit easier because it's pre-recorded, so you can make yourself sound a million times better. But when I've like presented on Front Row, which was live, it's really terrifying. But if you've got a good production team behind you and you've got time to practice the script, I'm dyslexic as well, so that makes it even more complicated. And any names that don't sound like, you know, John Smith is like really hard for me. So it's like awful, and I just get so like, you know. So there's that kind of added thing from a kind of dyslexic point of view. But I think that if you're a host, as I said, you get paid more money. And obviously some people are really interested in like being visible, you know, and being like known. So there's that, I suppose, not personally for me, but like there's a lot of that. But you just have to be really, really good at interviewing people and being able to connect and being able to listen. So it is powerful, obviously, in many ways. You can really destroy all the work that a producer's done just by being a bit lazy and not having enough time to take it in. Lazy might be wrong. We're all stretched, right? So there's that. But you really have the power to like shape it in terms of the listener, really. So it's kind of complicated, it's complex, but what I would say is a host is a massive skill.
Now tell me about how Stance came about.
Well, it started originally as a transatlantic conversation, with a woman called Hetta Fell, who's now gone on and she's doing something else. But basically, like, I'm a journalist, came from a journalistic background and obviously from an artsy background. She came from more of a brandy background, charity. So the combination worked really, really well. But what we knew is that obviously like Brexit was happening and then like hate crime rose massively after that. So it was like a clear line based on like the dog whistle politics that was happening at the time. And then obviously Trump stuff, and we just saw everything just escalating. And we wanted to kind of counteract that. And also I'm really interested in journalism and media, like media policy and communication and journalism ethics and stuff. And I saw how we were letting people down as journalists. And I wanted to like counteract that really and provide a kind of different narrative to what you hear. So it wasn't necessarily about reacting to mainstream. Some of it was about that, but it was also just about showcasing people that we thought were interesting, saying interesting things around arts, culture, and current affairs, whether that was activists, politicians, academics, you know, musicians. It was just about showcasing people, but with a global perspective, which I really wanted to push on. And actually a stance over the past year or so, we pushed that even more. And we've won like awards, and it's going really from strength to strength for a little pod independent, which is really, really good. So I think it was all about showcasing stories that you wouldn't necessarily hear a lot about, or talking about big stories but doing it in a different way. But we don't necessarily agree with like all of the guests, for instance, but it's all about providing a wider perspectives, because I could tell that it was desperately needed. And you hear it now all the time in the newsroom, people talking about wider perspectives, but it just takes them so long to catch up because they're like in a bubble. So
yes. And now what is it like, you know, being a co-founder of a podcast? Because I'm guessing you're having to do a lot of the work. What was it like for you having that idea and then it becoming like a physical thing that you're now working on?
I run it all myself, so it's quite a lot of work. I've always done all of the scripting and the words and the cues and all that kind of stuff, because that's obviously my strength and I know loads about the arts naturally. So again, all this stuff comes quite naturally to me. Because I work in curation as well, I like the idea of like fitting stuff together, you know, curation and editorial. So again, it's quite natural to me. I'm always looking around, listening, hearing, speaking to random people on the street, speaking to my friends across the world. So all that stuff's quite straightforward. I've had to learn quite a lot about like, which has been amazing. And I think I've taken to it quite naturally about like finance and like, you know, press and promotions. Although I've been on the press side, but just about how you like you let people know what you're doing and that kind of thing. And as I said, the finance stuff, setting up a business. But it's going well. Look, it's independent. So it's not like we're like get loads of funding and all of that. I've never applied for funding. Like everything that we do, it comes from like other work that I do, so like branding work, and that's how I pay staff as well who work with me. And obviously it is hard because like since COVID we've not had any sponsorship because no one's doing any events, you know, but I've got a bit of money in there, so I'm still being able to pay, you know, staff and things like that. But I think I just absolutely love making it. And I think that based on all of the different messages we get from around the world, or like artists who are like, oh my God, I love your podcast. I can't believe you're getting me to come on. I'm like, oh my God, we think you're great. You know, I feel like it's so vital. Unfortunately, actually, and part of me wishes there were so many other stances as opposed to like podcasts that might be made for women of color being a particular style. So I just hope, but then again, I am like, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know it's not necessarily easy to do compared to like a couple people behind a mic talking, you know, about politics or pop culture or something. So I realized the style is quite specific because it also mixes like old with new, you know, like in terms of, you know, how radio is made and things like that. But yeah, it's hard, but like I like a challenge. I don't like things that are easy. I would get really bored if things were easy and I'd be like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? I'd like fill my time with something else. I'm one of those ridiculous people, not a workaholic, but I like problem solving and like being critical, you know, with myself and how I'm doing things. So it's hard, but it's good to know it's been going from strength to strength, basically, in terms of money that we've made without literally getting any money from anyone, and just the reach.
Yes. I know you've spoken to a lot of people, but I want to know who are some of the most interesting people that you have spoken to?
God, that's so hard. I can't believe you asked me that. I don't know. I speak to, do you know what? I think back to so many of the podcasts. I spoke Selma James, who I loved, who is a fantastic activist and academic. I spoke to her really early on when we looked at the art of the denigration of care, and what had happened in terms of how we viewed care, or looking at care historically. And she, as an activist, she was part of the wages for housework movement back in the day. And she was also married to Sile James, the academic and thinker, legendary thinker. And I spoke to her, she was 80 something, and she's still going. And she was just great just to talk about it. And also the way she talked about and critiqued feminism, how we're all feminists now. Not all of us, but a lot of us are feminists, or whatever that means. But actually you're still paying your cleaner and the person who's looking after your child a terrible wage, but you're doing okay, and it tends to always be women of color, or women who are not from that country, and they've got their own children. So, picking holes in the feminist movement, which I think is really important now, because some feminists have gotten all right, i.e. white women, but a lot of others haven't. And actually we need to really be thinking about that before we all start saying we're all feminists and believing their cause, because it's not the same as ours.
Yeah.
So she was just fantastic, I think, at critiquing lots of different stuff, but then also being really positive and offering solutions. But she just came to my head. But so many different people. Shireen Neshat, who we spoke to, who's a visual artist from Iran, living in America, talking about her practice. Travis Alabanza talking about their work, burgers. I love performance art. We've got a great interview coming up with Ebo Taylor, who's the founder of High Life from Ghana. He's 80 something. It was amazing to talk to him. But I just enjoy speaking to so many of the people, because I learned so much in the process. And also I always have a laugh as well. That's another thing. It's not serious, although sometimes I'm God, does it sound really serious? But it's not all serious. We're people who, a lot of the people who I speak to, which I like, are people who think, and they're not heavily curated, fake people who jump on movements, which is a massive thing. They jump on Black Lives Matter, or they'll jump on feminism when literally it's because it's trendy. And unfortunately you will see that a lot with people of color as well. But what I find is we don't talk to people like that. We talk to people who are not curated, people who think, but they also know how to have a laugh. You know what I mean? They go out and they have a laugh, and they love people, sort of thing, or just obsessed with what they're doing, or have a message. So I think that's the key thing, and that's something that I think I have in Simmet. That's the thing that I have that's kind of similar between me and them. This is kind of who we are and what we live and breathe in terms of our work and our values, but we definitely know how to have a laugh.
Yes, that is quite important, actually.
Definitely, especially if you're thinking about stuff that can be quite serious,
Yeah. You mentioned that you were working with young people at South Bank Centre, and you were the exclusive producer of the Violet Night podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I used to run the young people's program at South Bank Centre, 15 to 30s. I still do work with young people all the time, with different arts organisations, which I love, which is training or podcasting, or again, it doesn't have to be around training and podcasting. It can be curating any kind of event, given a good brief. But the Violet Nights was a strand that actually started before I worked there, and it's basically a social space for young people to get together to talk about different ideas relating to pop culture and things that are in there that they're thinking about. And it actually was started by two women who interned at South Bank Centre, and they came up with the idea, right? So of course it's going to be good because they're part of the audience. So I was we've got to take that forwards. But also I was thinking, this is just in London, still so many people wouldn't necessarily come to South Bank Centre because it doesn't, for a lot of people, it's not that appealing to go into a big centre like that. Why would they want to go there if they've got culture on their doorstep? Why would they? Or culture on their estates or in their houses. It's not necessarily an amazing place for lots of people. Some people it is, but for a lot of young people, who cares, right? And so there was that. And I said, well, how can we try and reach them? So I thought a podcast would be a really good way of reaching people outside of London, but also people who don't really care about South Bank Centre, or they don't know that it exists. So we thought a podcast would be good. And I thought, well, instead of me doing it, why don't I get young people to make it? Because again, they can pick out the best lines from the live event. So we have live events every month. So I was let's make it into a training opportunity. So it'd be 2 days intensive. So we'd meet in the daytime on the day of the event, and I'd teach them everything that they need to know. We'd be working as a production house. Then they would do the live production. Obviously, we have a sound engineer who is recording it live, the event, then they'd give us the raw file of the event, which is like an hour to 90 minutes. And then we'd work the next day after the event, after they'd done little interviews, vox pops, and taught them the basics about what we wanted to make into a podcast. And then we'd have someone make it for the young people, but they would come up with everything, even the marketing copy and the text they would do. So it kind of worked as a kind of really holistic like circle, you know what I mean? So it was programmed by and for young people. The actual Violet Nights event, I would like oversee it as an exec kind of thing, but it would be programmed by younger people who work at South Bank Centre. Then the young people would come into the podcasting course, the free 2-day podcasting course, then like make it, and then it would go out for young audiences. So that's the sort of approach that we made. So we looked at stuff like cancel culture before, no one was using that term. And then we were also looking at like queer activism now, you know, what's happened. And then we also like sometimes plugged into events that were happening at South Bank Centre, where you looked at whose environment is it anyway, you know, because it's such a big issue now, the environment, but who's included and who's not. Who are the continued voices who take over? We all know who they are. So it was also just about looking at that, like what the obsession with a lot of like movements for white people just to take it over, when like why are you doing that when you're not even necessarily at the center of it? So it's also just about like critiquing the typical things that always happen, but then also showcasing actually this isn't the center, we're doing it anyway, and this is the amazing work that we're doing. So so we might look at like things like that, or connect to like women in grime, which would connect to an event that was happening at South Bank Centre, you know, when Angie Thomas talked to her about her book On the Come Up, in the come up, I think the book was called, and then we would respond to that. So there'd be so many different ways that we do it, but that would all be with young people who work at South Bank Centre to curate it, not just me.
What do you think? Did you see a change in the young people when you were working with them? Because now they're taking ownership of it. You know, they are doing all these things. What kind of an impact did you see happening within the young people?
I think, yeah, you really got to see it, because I think one of those things is like there's so much language, where I think language is so interesting because it's so political and so can be really toxic, and like something you say can have a different meaning for so many different people. So I'm always quite like sensitive around that, and obviously being a journalist, I'm really sensitive around that. And language is violent as well, because as we said, like a lot of stuff that the politicians were saying during Brexit, then hate crime rose, right? So it's like, it is violent. So it's not rocket science there, although loads of people like to deny it or say snowflake or whatever rubbish they want to say to not look at the truth. But I was really aware of language getting in the way of things. But actually, if you just show them, this is what it is, what do you think about it? A lot of the way that they organize their thoughts is exactly how you would editorially anyway. So it's just about explaining that it seems complicated, but it's not. You just need to explain why you want to keep something in the podcast and why you don't, and agree with it and work collaboratively as a team. So there were like basic things, like really explaining the differences between roles, I suppose, that like they might not know, but a lot of the stuff that matters, which is like the critical thinking and how you organize it, people know it anyway. If you think about people like who didn't go to university, right? They know about politics anyway. A lot of the time, like sometimes you go to university and then you develop all these terms, and then you go 360. You're like, oh, it's stuff that I knew anyway, but I can just say it in less words. Do you know what I mean? So it's also just about demystifying a lot of this stuff that is made so technical and so academic when it doesn't actually need to be. So I'm not saying these young people didn't necessarily go to university, but it's the same kind of thinking. Just because you're not part of it doesn't mean you don't understand it. In fact, you can understand it in a much more clear way than people who've been part of it for ages do, because they turn themselves in knots. And it's also about a lot of those ideas about like, if you have a woman who's been an assistant to like an executive director or something like that for 30 years, who's to say she's not an expert like him when she's seen so many of his documents and been in all the meetings? Obviously, if it's something specific, you know, like a surgeon, it's different. But, you know, a lot of that stuff about expert, you know, is not true. And I learned a lot from them. But yeah, it was really good to see them believe in themselves, because, you know, language gets in the way and tells people that you can't do it because you haven't got X, Y, and Z. But everyone's born with common sense and critical thinking. They just need to be confident enough to use it. And I was explaining to them in a journalistic audio sense.
I love it. You know, I love, you seem so confident and so sure in yourself. Have you always been like that?
Do I? Confident and sure? I don't know. Maybe it's when I just stopped caring so much about what people think, although that's not true actually, because I've always been like quite confident, and I suppose, and I came from like quite a Rastafarian family, so and it's always been like quite proud of being part of that Rastafarian family and the values of Rastafarianism. We were not part of a strict Rastafarian sect, one of the more liberal sides, but I think that always like stuck to me. So then when I was like going out into the world and I saw a lot of like, anti-blackness and all that, I was like, what's going on? Like I didn't get it, you know what I mean? Brixton's like so mixed, you know what I mean? So I didn't get all of this. I was obviously living in a bubble myself. So for me, a lot of this stuff I've also just always, it's kind of just been in my head to be critical and look at the world from like a global lens and not just believe what people are telling you. So I was always just a bit like, what's going on? I've always kind of like had that face like, what? And then you ask someone like, why do you know that? And they're like, oh, like they literally have no like basis for their understanding, you know, and these are supposed to be the smartest people in the newsroom. So I saw all of that and I was just like, oh my God, this is really annoying. But then I was also really like worried about it. So I suppose it was one of those things where like getting the experience that I needed and then taking that somewhere else. So I already had that knowledge. I learned journalism, and like a lot of journalists want to be writers, by the way, and write books. And I wasn't like that, right? I wanted to be a journalist. So that's another thing that, you know, that's why there's a problem with journalism as well, because a lot of them don't actually want to be journalists. They want to be authors and write books, right? But that's another subject. So for me, I lived and breathed the subject because I taught it. I didn't just study at like an elite or Russell Group university and then get into journalism. I actually understood the basic principles of journalism. And then I worked in the journalistic environment, so learnt loads and also saw what a lot of these people were like, which was really good for me to see, okay, this is what people think. And then I took all of that knowledge and left. I actually pitched the idea of Stance to the BBC, and they said it would ghettoise content. So I was like, okay, they obviously don't understand what I'm saying, so I'll just do it myself. But actually, since then, a few different outlets have been interested in taking Stance, not necessarily at the BBC, although I had brief conversations with someone. I was like, no, I don't want to, because I like it how it is. And also I don't want it to be popular and massive and be taken over by something that it's not. Now, I don't have a problem with popular. I love popular and I love pop culture. I'm really into it. But I don't think Stance is a global thing. It's not like a UK thing. So yeah, so the confidence thing, I don't know. It's just something that comes with experience.
I also read somewhere an article where you talk about that you love to travel, and specifically traveling alone. And so I wanted to ask you, what is it about traveling that you like?
I know. Do you know what? It's so funny to say that, because it just makes me feel like, oh my God, I wish I could travel now. I just love meeting people and being in new cultures and new environments and taking it in. And I have since I've been like really young. I've been coming to America on my own to visit my family here. And then I went to like China on my own when I was a teenager, late teens. I went to India on my own and did a bit of work experience in the bureau in BBC Mumbai. I just love the world and I love people, and I'm interested in our similarities and differences, and I love food and I love music, so it's like perfect. And also if you travel, although I travel a bit more with like family and friends now, but if you travel on your own, it really pushes you, you know, to like meet people and talk and connect. And so I've just always been interested in that. And Stance is ultimately a global podcast. I would love to do more traveling. That's like my dream. But then I did actually get to go to, like, during COVID and stuff, I did go to France and do a program from there in August. And then I also spent some time in Italy and I traveled a bit there, and I've been really lucky not to catch COVID and stuff. So I'm definitely quite adventurous in that way. But for me, it's always felt like one of the most important things in life, to get out there if you can afford it, you know what I mean? And I'd always worked part-time, even when I started my early career at the BBC, because, you know, you weren't getting like full-time shifts. And I was always like working in bars and restaurants and, you know, hairdressing places, like so many different jobs and that's what I spent my money on. I'm not like the biggest saver. Now I've got the business, I save in the business, but for me, I love the idea of doing experiences and living life, and traveling for me is like central to that.
Oh, I've always said to myself, oh, I want to travel, and I have a list of places, but I've never made the jump. Like, I love going to England, places in England by myself. Yeah. So I used to love traveling to Leeds, and I loved traveling to London by myself because it was different from where I am in Rotherham. But, you know, hearing that you jumped and you went and traveled, and on your own as well, I thought I was the only person who liked going to places by myself. But knowing that other people like it too is good. I also read that you like books. And so what book are you reading at the moment?
I like books. Do you know what? I do love books, but I must say, in terms of like art forms, whether that's books, theatre, like music, blah, 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 my most natural one is definitely music. And like when I was at school, I was never a massive bookworm because of the whole dyslexia thing. But I do love books a lot. What am I reading right now? That is such a good question. Well, basically, I don't know if I've read in the past week because I've just moved to America. So I'm not really reading anything like this second, but I'm reading The New Yorker, if that's useful. It's
Yeah.
not really a book, but I picked up The New Yorker yesterday and I started to read that. There is another book. There is a book, but it's like packed somewhere and I can't see it. But a lot of the time I'll read like 3 books at the same time. And then depending on like, if I get a bit bored of one, I'll go to the other one, which is like quite random. So I had 3 books by my bedside in London a week ago. And now for the life of me, I can't remember what those 3 books are. But there is a book it's published by Dialogue Books. It's come to my head now. It's published by Dialogue Books. Oh God, I can't remember. It's really annoying.
It's okay. It's all right. But another thing with reading I like is that you get to explore the world in the little book. So if you don't get a chance to travel, it's another way that you can have a look. You just mentioned that you moved to New York. What motivated you to move? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I have always really liked New York. Again, for me, like it's quite similar to London. So I wanted to go somewhere that had that culture and all of that kind of stuff, a similar vibe, a lot going on. And also in terms of podcasting and audio, it is the center as well. So that's why I wanted to do that because I felt like the UK podcasting scene is amazing, but it's quite small. And I wanted to go somewhere where it was a bit more crowded, bigger, where it was like a kind of competitive market, and I wanted to just learn and be in that, but also use the skills that I have. Working as a journalist for so long, over a decade or whatever. So that's the kind of main reason. And I've got family in New York. My family are from Jamaica, but I've got some family who live in Queens. I'm in Harlem right now in the city. But yeah, so I just saw this job as a producer and it just looked really great. And one thing I would say is like you will definitely, or one will definitely get to a point in your career where you're like talking to people who understand what you're saying, they appreciate what you're saying, you're having an amazing conversation, but at the same time, you've obviously got your interview hat on. Yeah. And like that's what happened with this job, with the people that I spoke to. And it was just like a perfect thing. So I start next week. So I'm really excited to be working with them, doing narrative form podcasts, hopefully working on some partnerships and doing like entertainment. I'm open to doing anything. I'm just really excited about like getting in it and working in a kind of journalistic space again, because obviously Stance is me. I have a team of producers that work with me, but it's a different thing. It's kind of led by me and stuff, so it'd be good to be more in a journalistic organization, but different to like the BBC where I was for 8 years, which was amazing in so many ways, but I want something different.
Well, good luck, and I hope you have fun. Which women are you inspired by and why?
Which women am I inspired by? I'm inspired by so many people, especially so many people that I talk to or I read articles. But what I would say is the women that I'm inspired by is definitely like my mum and my aunties, and my late grandmother, my mum's mum, who was amazing. Definitely family. I'm quite a family person, although you might not think it because I'm always like rushing around doing loads of stuff and all of that. But for me, like family and friends is like the most important thing. So my mum is like an amazing person. She's not like, people say my mum's my best friend. She's not like that, because my mum would be like, I'm not your friend, I'm your mum. So we've got that connection, but we just get on so well. She's always been the most encouraging person ever. Like I realize now that lots of people come from families where their parents tell them what they should do, like be a doctor, be a lawyer, marry this person in the same color and all that, like same religion. Like, no, I didn't have any of that. So I feel so lucky to be able to not have that pressure from someone that I love and respect so much, because I think that must be really difficult if it's someone that you love who brought you into this world, giving you that pressure. And I think that must be so hard. And I'm so grateful that I didn't have that pressure and that I was able to just think freely. And obviously people who come from that pressure, they have their own minds as well, but I just think there must be something quite difficult in that. So I think that growing up, I'm so thankful that I was able to just do what I want, as long as I worked really, really hard and was respectful and gave my all and was authentic and all of that. That were the only things that my mum said. So I think my mum is amazing, and she's definitely like the best person ever. And then I'm lucky, I've just got so many different friends who live in different cities or countrysides in the UK or different parts of the world. who chat to me and they're really loving. I think I'm lucky. I've got really positive people around me. I don't really have like a lot of like negativity, or like in female circles so much jealousy, you know what I mean, or talking about diets the whole time and all that weird stuff. Like I haven't got any of that with my female friends, for instance. We like hold each other up, suggest interesting things that we should be checking out, and quite positive. Again, I feel like sometimes female relationships are really toxic and I just don't have any of it. So I'm definitely say my friends and my mum.
Oh, I love that. Why do you think diversity is important, especially in the media?
God, well, I think that because it hasn't been diverse, it's given us so many problems. If you've constantly got people with blind spots who don't recognize they have blind spots and they're arrogant and ignorant, it creates a toxic environment. Our job as journalists is supposed to like decipher information and critique stuff and research properly and have integrity and be objective. And I think that journalists and people in the media are not taking it seriously enough. And diversity is the only way to do that. Diversity of thought, diversity in terms of color, diversity in terms of experience, and obviously, crucially, diversity in terms of something that we're obsessed with in the UK, which is class. But I think there's so many reasons for that, you know, because we're kind of segregated in many ways. I know people like to think we're not, and I know we're not America, but actually, when you look in the workplace, or when you go to a party of someone in your workplace and you're the only minority, you know is segregated, and this person's from London, for instance. So there's reasons why we're like that, but we need to work a little bit harder, and we need to stop just being obsessed, which I find in the journalism environment, which I talked about before, about people wanting to be writers and things like that. We need to stop being obsessed with our own journeys and our own careers, when actually your job is to inform the public. That is your job, and if you can't do that job, move along and let someone else do it.
That's a tweetable moment right there. um, what advice would you give to young people today who are wanting to get into like journalism?
Wow, the advice is that I would say is that like basically think about what you want to do and do it, right? So I do an idea separate to like your job. So have something on the side, because in your job, you can't always do everything you want to do. And that's normal as well. I've actually seen some young people who are like, oh, I'm not interested in learning about current affairs because I want to do arts. And it's like, no. You need to learn it all, and then you can be specific, because it also gives you you'll be more employable. So I think obviously you want to learn and get some experience in traditional spaces, which is really, really good. But don't rely on those spaces to lift you up or to give you an opportunity, because that's not how they work. Because a lot of those spaces, people are just thinking about themselves, or they're like overworked, blah, 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 blah. And so, you know, it is quite rare, especially if you're a person of color, to have someone notice you. So don't be thinking someone's going to notice you. And also, ask people for help as well. And again, don't just think, oh, if you're like a woman of color, like, sort of some average middle class white guy won't help, because they might help actually. And lots of them helped me more than, for instance, white middle class women, right? So that's what I'm trying to say about these ideas of feminism and all that. We have to also look at it very differently, because that might be their struggle, but our struggle might be a bit different as well. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that there isn't issues with the archetypal sort of white middle class man, but let's really look at it properly, okay? We have very different struggles to white feminists, so always remember that, okay? And you have to work really hard. You have to work really hard. Sometimes there are battles that you have to choose. Sometimes you just have to be quiet and listen to something really ignorant, take it in. Also, another thing that I'd say is, if you have a conversation with someone in person, in the office, write that down over email and just confirm it over email. It's just that you just have records of everything. It's not about being like suspicious and being like, oh, I'm doing it. Just do it all the time. Make it your natural habit to be like, oh, it was really good to talk to you. I look forward to be able to shadow you. Or it was really good to talk to you. Thank you for telling me and giving me that feedback about the interview. You know, you need to sort of keep a record and be really on it. And just really do your homework and know what you're talking about as well. You don't want to be going in there just using, you know, personal experiences, or using like a few anecdotal stuff. You want a bit of that because you'll be surprised how many people do it there, but they kind of get away with it. But you also want to be backing it up with facts as much as you can. Or if you haven't got that, that's the interesting story as well. Why haven't you got any facts or data on this? That shows you that there are holes or blah, blah, blah. So you need to be thinking like that as well. And not that I'm anti like lived experience, although I think we should just say experience. But anyway, not that I'm anti experience, but we need more than that as well, I think. So yeah, allies come in all shapes and sizes. Remember that. And also be friendly and open, but very much keep your professional hat on. And have something that you've got going on the side, so your whole identity isn't about that formal workplace. And obviously contact people, try and get them to mentor you or get them to get you to shadow and all this kind of stuff. And also when you meet people, be direct and straight to the point, not because you're being rude, but just because they've only got a short amount of windows. You don't want to spend too much time just informally talking.
How have you coped during COVID in terms of like job-wise and like personal-wise?
It's been okay. Well, firstly, like a lot of my work I do remotely, so it's been okay for me. But what I've struggled with massively, obviously had someone that I knew like passed away quite early on, a nurse called Amy who grew up on our estate in Brixton. So that was like really hard. And my great uncle passed away, not during COVID, but he died. So there's been like a bit of death and stuff, which has been horrible, obviously. But in terms of what I found really hard is not being able to socialize and gather with people and like dance as well, like being in clubs or live music or theatre or just anywhere where people gather, like meeting friends. I think that has been so hard. And it's made me realize the importance of like movement, dancing and arts and culture. So it breaks my heart to see what's happening to the industry, but I know it will rebuild itself. I hope it will. But that's been really hard, not being able to like dance. No one's been to a bloody gig in so long. It's awful. Although I did actually, when I was in Italy, I went to some gigs, not gigs, but it was like outside concerts, like a jazz concert. And it was amazing. I was almost like in tears. I didn't even know, but like so many people were as well. It wasn't just me being like an emotional Cancerian person. And that was great. But it was like all social distance. Everyone had their masks on, so it was a bit weird. But I really can't wait to like get into a club and like start socializing with people again.
Yes. Oh, what was the event about when you were in Italy? The jazz one.
It was just like a jazz event happening in Umbria, which is like this big, it's like next door to Tuscany, this region. It's really cool region. And they have Umbria Jazz, which is like a massive global jazz festival. And so it was just like an offshoot of a jazz concert, basically. And it was just great. Yeah, it was just brilliant. But, it was summer and it was open air, so it was okay. And they did the whole testing before and stuff. But it was just great to just be in a space and listen to music with other people, because you just feel so much, rather than just listening to it at home.
Yes. I've got one last question to do with like Black Lives Matter, the movement. I think you mentioned earlier that a lot of people jump on that movement just for a time because it's trending. What do you think as journalists should be done on the long term? Because sometimes I realize we do it as like a day or a week, and then after that we just stop looking at it.
Yeah. It's complicated because obviously the Black Lives Matter movement is a movement. There's not like one leader and it's like global. And for me, I think it's an amazing like raising awareness campaign right now. You got governments and everyone's saying it. And, in terms of press and marketing, just looking at it like that, it's freaking incredible. What a campaign. But obviously it has such a like serious message. And I think that journalists need up to date actually what's happening in terms of like legislation, and maybe look at it also outside of parts of the West as well, and looking at what's actually happening in other countries, or looking at it, there's so many different ways to look at it. So I think that we need to develop more of a nuanced way of looking at it, and we need to make sure that we're on top of what's happening in terms of like, not just covering it when someone dies. Do you know what I mean? And we should be chasing up organizations and saying, oh, okay, you're banging on about Black Lives Matter, but what are you actually doing? And we also need to be saying, what budget are you putting towards it? Because that's another thing. That's how you know whether people take it seriously. You ask how much budget they put, and then like, oh, they're serious or they're not, or they'll just like brain hive Black members of staff and then pretend that they've never done it like half an hour later. or like more like a week later, and then they won't mention it at all. And so I think it's all about money, it's all about resources, and it's all about really following the story and updating yourself on the story. But that will come naturally if you have more minorities or Black people in the newsroom. I should say Black people, actually, because all minorities are very, very different, obviously. Black people are different as well. But I think all of that will become natural once you've got people out of the newsroom who are not doing very well and not adding anything. In fact, they're in the way, and then replacing those people with people who actually know what they're talking about and can deal with today's problems.
Ooh, great way to end. Thank you so much, Chrystal, for speaking to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, how nice. It's so, so good to talk to you.